North Atlantic, February 1943. Midnight on the heaving black water. Convoy HX-217 creeps eastward toward Britain. 50 merchant ships laden with fuel, munitions, and food, stretched across miles of icy darkness. The moon is gone. Only the IE faint phosphorescence of bow waves breaks the night. Somewhere beyond the horizon, a wolfpack is hunting. On the bridge of the escort destroyer HMS Viceroy, the gale howls through every rivet. Radar scopes sweep blankly. The operator rubs his eyes. Sea clutter, static, nothing definite. In the dim blue glow of the chart room, Lieutenant Commander Harold Brooks traces the convoy's position with a trembling pencil. The wind is blowing them north, closer to the known U-boat lanes. He knows it. But with his sonar sets washed out by the storm, Brooks can't confirm anything. Then, a flash, barely visible, aft on one of the freighters. 3 short blinks from an Aldis lamp. Morse code, off schedule, not from the signal bridge. The code book says that's an unauthorized transmission. Any stray flash at night could give away their position to the enemy. "Who's signaling?" Brooks snaps. The lookout shakes his head. The flash repeats. Same pattern, same frantic tempo. "Sir, it's from the SS Stanhope. Engine room ratings, by the look of it." Brooks feels his stomach. Tighten. Convoy regulations are absolute. No unauthorized signals after dusk. Too many ships have died that way. A careless lamp, a glint of steel, and within minutes, a torpedo slicing through the dark. Brooks grabs the voice tube. "Signalman, tell the Stanhope to cease signaling immediately." No reply. Only the howl of the storm. 5 seconds later, the Stanhope's lamp flashes again, brighter this time, the beam sweeping low over the sea. The dots and dashes come faster now. Gibberish at first, then the signalman decodes it aloud. U-boat surfaced port, side convoy. Bearing 270, 200 yards. Brooks freezes. 200 yards? That's impossible. The convoy's escorts had swept that bearing 10 minutes earlier. But even as he starts to dismiss it, a low mechanical rumble cuts through the wind. Unmistakable. Diesel engines on the surface. Close. "Action stations!" Brooks shouts. On the Viceroy, claxons wail. Men tumble from bunks, boots hammering steel decks. The ship heels hard as her helm swings to port. Within seconds, the forward gun crew is sighting into blackness, searching for a shape that might not even be there. Then, lightning. Just for an instant, the sky flares white. And in that frozen flash, every man on deck sees it. A conning tower breaking the surface barely 3 ship lengths away, its outline ghostly against the waves. Fire. The 4-inch gun barks thunder. A flash of flame stabs through the night. Shells burst short, showering the U-boat with water. The submarine crashes dives, its silhouette vanishing into the swell. Seconds later, a torpedo's wake streaks past. The Viceroy's stern, close enough to see the vapor trail whip by. Brooks's heart slams in his chest. "ASDIC on! Get me contact!" The sonar operator listens, face pale. "Contact bearing 275, sir. Range 300 yards. Closing fast." Depth charges roll off the rails. The night erupts in orange blossoms of spray. The sea seems to lift itself and fall apart again. The Viceroy's engines scream as she turns hard through the debris. Moments later, an oil slick rises, broad, dark, unmistakable. The crew cheers. The U-boat is gone. Only then does Brooks realize who saved them. That foolish Flash, the one that nearly got the Stanhope court-martialed, had warned them in time to strike first. Down in the freighter's tiny signal shack, able seaman Thomas Jenks, age 23, slumps against the bulkhead, Aldous lamp still in hand. His face is gray with exhaustion, his eyes wide with disbelief. He'd broken every rule in the book. But as the convoy reforms and dawn creeps over the North Atlantic, the men on every bridge know the truth. That reckless Flash had saved 50 ships and thousands of lives. And the story of how one foolish sailor's decision reshaped convoy tactics, changed admiralty policy, and exposed a flaw in Allied anti-submarine doctrine would begin with that single, blinding signal on a freezing February night. By early 1943, the Battle of the Atlantic had become the longest, deadliest struggle of the war. It wasn't fought for territory or glory, but for survival, the supply lines that kept Britain alive. Every bullet, every loaf of bread, every gallon of oil that crossed the ocean came through these convoys. Lose them, and Britain starved. Each convoy was a moving city at sea, 40 to 60 merchant ships in slow formation, plowing through thousands of miles of open water. Tankers, freighters, trawlers, anything that could carry food, fuel, or munitions, all escorted by a handful of overworked destroyers and corvettes. The average convoy crawled at 8 knots, barely faster than a man could run. Against them lurked the hunters, Admiral Karl Dunitz's U-boat wolfpacks. Sleek, deadly, and nearly invisible, the submarines stalked the sea lanes from beneath the waves, waiting for the blacked-out silhouettes of merchant ships to appear against the pale Atlantic night. Dunitz's strategy was brutally simple. No lone attacks. Instead, multiple U-boats would converge on a single convoy, coordinating by radio to strike from every direction at once. When one submarine found prey, it shadowed the convoy, sending out a short encrypted Rudeltaktik message, the wolfpack signal. Within hours, half a dozen others would home in. By the time the first torpedo hit, it was already too late. A single successful wolfpack attack could sink 10 or 12 ships in one night. The survivors called it the Night of the Long Torpedoes, flames on the water. Lifeboats overturned in the freezing swell. The sky lit red from burning fuel. In the winter of 1942-43, the U-boats were winning. That's the world the convoy HX-22I-17 sailed into. A world of constant fear and fragile discipline. Every ship had orders to maintain strict radio silence. No lights, no signals, no unnecessary communication of any kind. Even the flicker of a cigarette could be seen for miles on a dark ocean. In theory, this silence kept the convoys hidden. In practice, it meant that if a ship spotted danger, a torpedo wake, a periscope, a surfaced U-boat, they often couldn't warn anyone in time. The rule was absolute. Better to lose one ship than betray the convoy. But rules written in London didn't always survive the chaos of the Atlantic. In the real world of freezing decks and heaving seas, discipline and desperation collided. Sailors watched their friends vanish in explosions they might have prevented, if only they'd dared to break silence. And in that tension, between order and instinct, obedience and survival, lived men like able seaman Thomas Jenks of the SS Stanhope. Jenks was no hero by reputation. He wasn't even supposed to be on watch that night. The Stanhope's signalman had been injured in a fall 2 days earlier, and Jenks, a former telegraph operator from Liverpool with a knack for Morse, had volunteered to take over. He knew the convoy rules by heart. Lights out, silence at. all times, under penalty of court-martial. But what he also knew, what every sailor knew, was that radar and sonar didn't always save you. Storms could blind the scopes, machinery failed, and the ocean, vast and black, could hide anything. That's what made convoy duty the cruelest posting in the war. You weren't just fighting the enemy, you were fighting the sea itself. Salt water froze solid on deck gear. Men chipped ice off guns to keep them working. Food came up frozen, water came down as sleet, and every watch ended with fingers too numb to grip the railing. And in that misery, U-boats thrived. The German Type 7 submarines, sleek, narrow, only 220 feet long, were small enough to vanish below the waves within seconds. They surfaced to charge batteries and attack at night, invisible against the horizon. Each carried 14 torpedoes and a crew of 44 men who called themselves the Grey Wolves. They were methodical hunters. German commanders like Otto Kretschmer and Erich Topp became legends, claiming dozens of kills before disappearing back into the Atlantic fog. Their success wasn't luck, it was science and discipline. They listened, calculated, attacked, silently, and slipped away. By early 1943, British and American escorts were improving their weapons: radar, sonar, depth charges, and the new Hedgehog anti-submarine mortar. But convoy defense was still part guesswork, part luck. The escorts simply couldn't see everything. That's why the Admiralty's orders emphasized silence over initiative. If every sailor tried to act on his own, chaos would follow. One false signal could cause ships to scatter, breaking the formation that protected them. But the danger of silence was clear too. Convoys were sometimes lost simply because no one dared to speak. When convoy HX-2217 sailed from Halifax that February, it carried 50 merchant ships and 6 escorts. The weather was atrocious. Freezing gales, mountainous seas, blinding spray that rendered radar nearly useless. Reports suggested that at least 7 U-boats were operating along their route. For 3 days, they saw nothing. Then, as the convoy entered the mid-Atlantic gap, the black pit beyond the reach of air cover, the wolfpack struck. The first hit came at night, 50 miles astern. A Norwegian freighter, the SS Gullfoss, took a torpedo amidships and vanished in less than 2 minutes. The escorts raced back but found only oil and debris. 2 hours later, another ship vanished from the radar plot. Then another. By dawn, the WWII convoy had lost 4 ships, and no one knew where the U-boats were. That night, the Stanhope's engines coughed and slowed. The chief engineer was nursing a failing fuel pump. The freighter drifted slightly out of position on the convoy's port flank, isolated just enough to make her vulnerable. Jenks was on the bridge, fighting to keep his lamp covered from the gale, when he saw it. A faint black shape, low in the water, riding the swell barely 200 yards off the beam. For a moment, he thought it was wreckage. Then the shape turned, and a faint green light flickered, the phosphorescent wake of a U-boat's propeller. He didn't think. He acted. He grabbed the Aldi's lamp, uncovered it, and sent the signal that would nearly end his career, but save the entire convoy. The bridge of the SS Stanhope was chaos. Wind howled through the open portholes. Waves struck the bow like cannon fire, and the steel deck bucked beneath Thomas Jenks's boots as if trying to throw him off. He didn't even realize what he was doing until the Aldi's lamp's shutter clacked open. 3 short flashes. 3 long. 3 short. SOS. Then again. Faster. desperate. He angled the beam low toward the nearest escort ship's bridge, fighting to keep it from sweeping the horizon. Behind him, the first mate shouted, "Jenks, what in God's name are you doing? Douse that light before they shoot us themselves." But Jenks kept flashing. His gloves were soaked, his fingers stiff, but he managed to send one coherent message through the storm. U-boat surfaced, port side, 270, 200 yards. Was madness, signaling in plain view at night, during blackout. A court-martial offense. But he'd seen the shadow, he'd seen the faint trail of exhaust, the glint of periscope glass catching the lightning. And on the bridge of the destroyer, HMS Viceroy, Lieutenant Commander Harold Brooks saw that flicker too. For a heartbeat, he thought it was enemy signaling. A U-boat trying to lure them. But something about the pattern was off. It was too frantic, too human. "Decode that," he barked. The signalman hesitated, then shouted, "Message reads, U-boat surfaced, port side convoy, bearing 270. Brooks froze. That bearing put the submarine right on their flank, inside the convoy's perimeter. Impossible. The sonar team had cleared that area only minutes ago. But then, over the roar of the wind, came a low, steady thrum. Not the deep rumble of a destroyer, but the lighter chug of diesel engines on the surface. Brooks didn't wait for confirmation. "Helm, hard to port! Bring us about!" The Viceroy heeled violently, spray blasting over the gun deck. The 4-inch gun crew swung their mount toward the dark horizon, squinting through the wind. For a few long seconds, nothing but the endless heave of the sea. Then, a flash of lightning, quick and cruel. There it was, the conning tower of a U-boat, barely 200 yards off, water cascading off its hull as it rode the waves. "Open fire!" The destroyer's gun roared. The first shell went wide, the second struck close enough to send a column of water drenching the submarine's deck. Men were visible, tiny, scrambling silhouettes, before the U-boat's bridge hatch slammed shut. The submarine began to slide beneath the surface, nose down. Brooks grabbed the intercom. "Azdic, get me contact." Contact bearing 275. "Range 300 yards. Closing fast," the sonar operator shouted back. The Viceroy's stern depth charge racks clanked open. The first pair of charges splashed into the dark, their fuses ticking down as the ship accelerated away. Seconds later, the sea erupted. 2 plumes of spray rose like geysers. The blast slammed against the destroyer's hull. "Second run," Brooks ordered. The destroyer circled back, slower this time, sonar pings echoing through the hull. "Contact, drifting deeper," the operator said. "Range 500, moving astern. Mark it. Drop pattern B." 4 more charges rolled off the rails. The detonations came slower this time. Whoomp! 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 Then silence. The ship's engines hummed. The sea hissed. Finally, the sonar operator looked up. "Sir, contact lost. Getting debris. And oil." Brooks exhaled for the first time in minutes. "We got him," but the celebration was short-lived. Over the radio, garbled through static, came a terse report from another escort. Multiple radar blips northwest. Possible second contact. The convoy's nightmare wasn't over. Brooks turned to his navigator. "They've got us pinned. That first sub was the bait. It was a classic Donitz tactic. One U-boat surfaces deliberately to draw escorts away, while others move in to strike the unprotected convoy. And now, with the EI Viceroy engaged, the merchant ships were vulnerable. "Signal all escorts," Brooks said. Form screen. Keep the convoy tight. On the Stanhope, Jenks watched the destroyer's muzzle flashes light the horizon like distant lightning. He'd done his duty, or maybe doomed them all. The first mate had already reported his signal to the captain, who stormed onto the bridge, face red with fury. "You've just invited every U-boat in the Atlantic straight to us," he shouted. "When this is over, I'll have you in irons." Jenks didn't argue. He just stared out into the black water where the U-boat had been. Then, from the convoy's rear, a dull explosion rolled across the sea. One of the freighters, the SS Montclair, had taken a torpedo. Flames rose high into the wind, painting the waves orange. Another explosion followed, closer this time. The wolfpack was attacking. The escorts split formation, chasing sonar echoes and radar ghosts, dropping depth charges into the dark. For the next 2 hours, the battle was a blur. Flashes of light, roars of detonation, the metallic screech of engines fighting the storm. And through it all, the Stanhope kept her lights dark. Jenks, hands trembling, stood by the signal lamp, waiting. Every instinct told him to help, to warn, to guide. But every rule told him to stay silent now. By dawn, the sea was calm again. The convoy had lost 3 ships, but the rest survived. 2 U-boats were confirmed destroyed, another damaged. And though few realized it at the time, the first kill, the one that broke the wolfpack's ambush before it began, had come from a single forbidden flash of light. When the Viceroy rejoined the formation that morning, Brooks requested the name of the man who'd sent the warning. The answer came back from the Stanhope. Able Seaman Thomas Jenks, temporary signalman. Brooks smiled grimly. "Tell him, if anyone calls him a fool, they can answer to me." When convoy HX 2117 limped into the Clyde 10 days later, battered, but mostly intact, the headlines called it a minor victory. To the Admiralty, it was just another successful crossing in the endless relay of supplies that kept Britain alive. 50 ships sailed, 47 arrived. An acceptable loss by wartime math. But within the grey halls of the Western Approaches Command in Liverpool, a report on the Stanhope caused a stir. Buried in the after-action logs was a single line. From HMS Viceroy's captain. Convoy likely saved by early warning signal from SS Stanhope, 2358 hours. Origin unconfirmed. Message not authorized under convoy regulations. The phrase, "not authorized," was enough to draw attention. In wartime bureaucracy, breaking blackout protocol was nearly sacrilege. The Admiralty's convoy manual stated in bold, "No lights, no signals, no exceptions." And yet somehow, one exception had saved them. 2 days later, a young lieutenant from Naval Intelligence, James Houghton, boarded the Stanhope to conduct a preliminary inquiry. The ship was still streaked with salt and soot, her crew gaunt from exhaustion. Houghton wore the crisp uniform of an officer who had never been truly cold at sea. He gathered the senior officers in the mess, notebook open, tone clipped. "Let's be clear," he began. "We're not disputing your courage, but someone violated standing convoy orders by transmitting an unapproved signal during blackout. I need to know who." The captain, a thick-set man named Parsons, didn't hesitate. "Able Seaman Jenks, sir. He's the one who used the Aldi's lamp." Jenks was summoned. He stood at attention, soaked cap in hand, boots leaving damp prints on the deck. His face was drawn, his voice quiet. "I signaled because I saw a U-boat, sir," he said. "No time to get the radio working. Thought it was better to risk one lamp than lose 50 ships." Houghton studied him. "Did you know the regulation against signaling?" "Yes, sir." And you ignored it? Yes, sir. Do you understand? The consequences of disobedience under wartime law? Yes, sir, I do. Silence. The officers at the table shifted uneasily. The Stanhope's crew watched from the doorway. Waiting, Houghton finally closed his notebook. That's all for now, able seaman. When Jenks left, the first mate muttered, "He saved our skins, and this is what he gets." But Houghton wasn't finished. He visited the Viceroy next, speaking with Commander Brooks, who gave a different picture. "That signal gave us the only warning we had," Brooks said. "If he hadn't flashed, we'd be adding 50 names to the memorial wall right now." "Still, it was against orders," Houghton replied. Brooks nodded slowly. "Then perhaps it's the orders that need changing." In London, the debate reached the Admiralty Operations Board within a week. The war at sea was going badly. Every convoy mattered. The board's chair, Admiral Sir Frederick Horton, listened to the case file with irritation. "So," Horton said, "a merchant sailor breaks blackout and happens to be right. That's not policy. That's luck." "But, sir," another officer countered, "the destroyer's log confirms a surfaced U-boat on that bearing. Without the warning, HX-2117 would likely have lost the convoy's center column." Horton frowned. "And if every ship starts flashing lamps at shadows, we'd lose a convoy a week. Discipline wins wars, not heroics." Still, the facts wouldn't vanish. U-boat communications intercepted days later confirmed that U-6113 and U-402, both part of the same wolfpack, had been sunk or damaged that night. One had surfaced prematurely, perhaps after mechanical failure. The other had tried to exploit the WWII. The diversion and been destroyed. The Admiralty couldn't ignore the result. A breach of protocol had led to tactical success. For Jenks, however, that success felt distant. When he came ashore, he was handed an official notice. Under review for breach of Convoy Regulation 9B. No medal, no mention. Just a terse reminder that saving lives didn't always mean saving one's reputation. He returned home to Liverpool for brief shore leave, where his mother greeted him with tears and a rationed pot of tea. He didn't tell her about the inquiry, only that the sea had been rough, and he'd done his part. Weeks passed. The war moved on. Convoy after convoy crossed the Atlantic, still under blackout, still haunted by U-boats. But whispers spread through the fleet about a sailor who had broken silence to save 50 ships. By spring, the story reached the Naval Tactical School at Plymouth, where analysts studying convoy losses began revisiting Jenks's case. They noticed a pattern. Many ships were lost not from lack of weapons, but from hesitation, the seconds wasted confirming a threat, the minutes lost waiting for permission to act. One report concluded bluntly, rigid silence doctrine may increase vulnerability during close engagement. In May 1943, a memo circulated among convoy commanders. Captains may, at discretion, authorize local visual warning signals if immediate danger is observed. It wasn't an open admission, but it was the first crack in a rule once considered sacred. Back on the Stanhope, now in dry dock for repairs, Jenks was summoned again, this time not to be reprimanded, but to receive a message. It came from HMS Viceroy, signed personally by Commander Brooks. To able seaman T. Jenks, the Admiralty may debate your conduct. I will not. Because you broke a rule, men lived. Because you acted, a wolfpack died. Whatever they decide, you have my thanks. H. Brooks. R.N. Jenks folded the letter carefully and tucked it into his pocket. He'd never meet Brooks again, but the words stayed with him for the rest of his life. The official verdict came weeks later. No further action. Conduct noted as exceptional under duress. No medal, no ceremony, just silence. The same silence that ruled the sea. But behind closed doors, his act was being studied by the men who wrote the manuals. And before the year was out, his foolish flash would lead to a quiet revolution in Allied convoy defense. By mid-1943, the Battle of the Atlantic had reached a critical pivot. The Allies were finally gaining an edge. New escort carriers filled the air gap. Long-range liberators hunted U-boats from the sky, and radar grew sharper every month. Yet even with technology advancing, the same rigid doctrines still ruled the decks. The blackout rule remained gospel. Admiralty officers, wary of chaos, insisted that convoys must remain silent or risk mutual destruction. And yet, tucked away in after-action summaries and tactical memos, Jenks's signal kept reappearing, a statistical outlier that refused to be ignored. At the Anti-Submarine Warfare Division in London, a young commander named Peter Marshall was tasked with reviewing visual communication failures. He had never met Jenks, but the Stanhope file crossed his desk one cold April morning. It was supposed to be routine: categorize, assess, archive. Instead, it lit a spark. Marshall underlined a phrase in the report: "Convoy likely saved by early warning transmitted visually from merchant vessel." He wrote in the margin, "If visual warning works once, it can work again, provided protocol limits range and timing." That comment triggered a quiet experiment. In June 1943, Marshall ordered trials in the Firth of Clyde using retired merchant ships and training escorts. The idea was simple: simulate a convoy under attack and see whether quick. Low-intensity signals could warn escorts without exposing the fleet. They tested colored flares, shaded lamps, even infrared filters scavenged from aircraft gun sites. The results shocked the observers. At ranges under 1,000 yards, typical convoy spacing, the escorts could spot a coded signal instantly. Beyond that, the light vanished into the mist. It was a perfect compromise, visible enough for friendly ships, invisible to a U-boat half a mile away. Marshall compiled the data into a memorandum titled "Immediate Visual Warnings in Emergency Contact Situations." The conclusion was understated but revolutionary. Under conditions of confirmed local contact, convoy vessels may employ restricted visual signaling to alert nearby escorts. Discretion remains with ship's master. In bureaucratic language, it meant only one thing: the blackout was no longer absolute. By the summer, convoys were carrying a new line in their sailing orders: in extremis, visual signals authorized for immediate threat warning. Few sailors noticed the change. Fewer still knew it was inspired by a single merchant seaman's judgment months earlier. But among the escort captains, word spread. Commander Brooks, still patrolling the Atlantic in the Viceroy, received the new directive with grim satisfaction. "About bloody time," he muttered, folding the message. "Maybe now we'll let the men think for themselves." The Viceroy's next crossing tested the new policy almost immediately. A tanker sighted a periscope in heavy fog and used a shaded green lamp to signal. The warning reached the nearest corvette in seconds. Depth charges followed. The U-boat never got within firing range. The convoy completed its run without a single loss. No one mentioned Jenks in the official report, but Brooks did, quietly, in his personal log. Jenks's precedent validated. By autumn, the Navy formalized the procedure as Emergency Visual Action Signal, EVAS-1. Each convoy carried laminated cards showing approved patterns: 3 short flashes for contact sighting, 2 long for confirmation, 1 long, and 2 short for distress. Every signal was low intensity, shielded toward the convoy center, never upward toward the sky. It was designed not to betray the fleet, but to keep it alive. Marshall's report circulated through the fleet, then to the Americans, where the U.S. Navy adopted a similar system, codenamed Quick Light, And in every briefing, one example was cited, never by name, but always by story. A merchant sailor who disobeyed orders to warn of a submarine at close range. Even the Germans noticed. Intercepted Kriegsmarine logs later revealed that by late 1943, U-boat captains complained of uncoordinated convoy response, as if the ships were reacting faster than before. They called it Die Blitzloswarnung, the warning without lightning. What they didn't know was that convoy defense had quietly evolved. Not because of new machines, but because of one man's nerve. By 1944, Allied sinkings dropped sharply. In May alone, 41 U-boats were destroyed, more than any previous month of the war. The tide had turned. Historians would later credit radar, code-breaking, and escort carriers, all true. But buried in the tactical annexes was another factor. The new rapid warning doctrine, derived directly from that unauthorized Aldous lamp signal in February 1943. Meanwhile, Thomas Jenks served out his contract quietly. The Stanhope returned to convoy duty that autumn, and Jenks went with her, still standing his watch by the bridge, still carrying the same dented signal lamp. He never spoke of the investigation again. When asked if he'd risk it a second time, he shrugged. "If I see a wolf, I'll bark," he said simply. In December, the Stanhope's captain pinned a small note beside the mess hall clock. "In case of danger, remember the man with the lamp." The crew knew what it meant. Legacy in silence, by war's end. Jenks's name appeared in no citations, no public rolls of honor. Yet every convoy that crossed the Atlantic after mid-1943 owed something to that foolish moment. In 1946, a small post-war conference on merchant Navy communication doctrine summarized the change in a single sentence. Discipline wins battles. Initiative wins wars. It was an idea born not in an office or a lab, but in a freezing gale, from a sailor who refused to let silence kill his friends. And though he would never know it, that one impulsive flash of light had reshaped the unseen war beneath the waves, proving that sometimes the difference between tragedy and triumph is the courage to break a perfect rule at the perfect time. When the guns finally went quiet in 1945, the sea kept its secrets. The convoys stopped sailing, the wolfpacks dissolved, and the vast North Atlantic fell silent again. Ships that had once crept across in terror now steamed openly, sunlight glinting off their rails. But for the men who had fought that long, invisible war, peace was a strange and heavy thing. Thomas Jenks came home to Liverpool with nothing but a discharge paper and the faint ringing in his ears from years of engines and wind. The Stanhope was scrapped, her steel melted down for new peacetime hulls. The men scattered, some to the merchant lines, some to shipyards, others to quiet jobs ashore where no one spoke of the nights when the sea burned. He rented a room above the docks, took work on a tug, and spent his evenings mending radios and lamps for a few extra shillings. The war, as far as anyone was concerned, was over. Once, at a pub, another sailor brought up the Stanhope and the story of the signal that saved a convoy. The details were already blurred. Some said the signal came from a Royal Navy frigate, others from an American escort. The names were gone, replaced by rumor. Jenks didn't correct them. He just smiled, finished his pint, and went home. Across the years that followed, his act lingered only in technical papers and staff lectures, one case study among thousands. His name was replaced with the phrase unidentified merchant rating. The men who had studied his file, Brooks, Marshall, Horton, moved on to other wars, other bureaucracies. The ocean forgot. But history has a way of keeping small lights alive. In 1951, a young instructor at the Royal Naval College named David Ashcroft stumbled across an archived memo from the Anti-Submarine Warfare Division. He was researching the development of visual convoy warnings and found the line that caught his eye. Case study HX2117. Convoy saved by unauthorized visual signal. 1943. Ashcroft dug deeper. In the margins of an old report, he found a name barely legible in pencil. A.S.T. Jenks. That discovery led him to the port records in Liverpool, then to the tug company on the Mersey, where an older man with a weathered face was still working night shifts. Ashcroft met Jenks on a foggy morning beside the pier. He introduced himself awkwardly and said, "Sir, I think you might have saved 50 ships once." Jenks blinked, confused. "That was a long time ago," he said. Ashcroft grinned. Maybe not long enough to forget. A month later, the Royal Navy issued an addendum to its 1943 convoy record, officially naming able seaman Thomas Jenks as the origin of the Emergency Visual Action Signal. It wasn't a medal or a parade, just a correction in a dusty file. But it was more than nothing. The press never picked it up. Jenks never told his family. The paper sat in a government drawer for another 20 years, then made its way into a maritime museum archive. Still, among the men who taught navigation and convoy history in the decades that followed, the tale of the man with the lamp became quiet legend. A parable about instinct and duty, the courage to break the rule that everyone else obeys. In the 1960s, a retired Commander Brooks was invited to give a lecture at Portsmouth on lessons from the Atlantic campaign. Near the end, someone asked him which single act among thousands best captured the spirit of those years. He thought for a long time, then said simply, "A sailor who disobeyed an order, and because he did, 50 ships saw the dawn." He never mentioned a name. He didn't have to. Years later, when Jenks passed away, his few belongings were boxed up by the dockmaster. Inside was a folded letter signed by Brooks, dated 1943, the one thanking him for acting when others would have hesitated. And beside it, still wrapped in oilcloth, lay an old Aldous lamp. The shutter was dented, the bulb long dead. But when the sunlight hit the lens, it caught a faint glint. A last, perfect reflection. For a moment, it almost looked like a flash. The kind that once saved a convoy. The kind that turned darkness into warning. The kind that changed the rules of the sea forever. The sea remembers in whispers, long after the men are gone, after the ships have rusted and the charts have yellowed. It keeps the echoes of what they did. Not the speeches or the medals, but the small, fleeting choices that changed everything. Historians still argue about what won the Battle of the Atlantic. Some say radar. Others, sonar. Some swear it was the codebreakers at Bletchley, or the American escort carriers that closed the air gap. They are all right in part. But ask the old sailors, the ones who were there, and they'll tell you it was the men who refused to freeze when the moment came. The war at sea was a war of patience, of staring into fog, of waiting for something you couldn't see until it was too late. And in that kind of war, hesitation killed more men than bullets. That's why Jenks's act mattered. Not because it rewrote strategy or technology, but because it reminded everyone, from admirals to mess stewards, that initiative still had a place, even in a machine as vast and ordered as a convoy. For every regulation written in ink, there had to be one man willing to test it in blood. By the late 20th century, maritime academies taught the Jenks signal as a case study in leadership under uncertainty. Though most cadets never knew the man's story, they studied the timing, the risk analysis, the tactical outcome, but they missed the heart of it. That courage often looks foolish until the results arrive. A foolish flash, a foolish signal, a foolish sailor. But that foolishness saved 50 ships, hundreds of lives, and maybe, in some quiet, immeasurable way, a piece of the Allied war effort itself. Today, somewhere on the floor of the North Atlantic, The wrecks of U-boats still sleep beneath the currents. The convoys they once hunted are long gone, their cargoes forgotten. But above them, merchant ships still pass through the same waters, their lights visible for miles, no longer hidden, no longer afraid. Every beam, every glow on that dark horizon is a defiance of the old silence. And if you listen hard enough, between the wind and the waves, you might still catch it. A faint flicker of light, a sailor's signal against the night, a reminder that sometimes the bravest thing a man can do is to disobey, and in doing so, keep an entire world from vanishing beneath the sea.